Right. Okay, I can see a prompt that says that this meeting is being recorded.
I just started. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. All right, so we're going to call to order the Municipal Accountability Review Board regular meeting for Thursday, May 21st from 10 to 12 noon. Before giving opening remarks, I'm going to ask Mr. Julian Frond to please do a roll call. Julian, can you unmute and orchestrate a roll call for us, please?
Yes, and as I call the names, if you could unmute yourself by doing *6, so that we can hear you respond, that would be helpful. Mr. Waxenberg.
Present.
Mr. Biller.
Give me 1 second.
Mr. Brockman. Mr. White, I heard greet us earlier. Mr. Falsigno, I heard greet us earlier.
I'm here.
Mr. Hamilton greeted us earlier. Ms. Shaw, I believe, is on the line.
Present.
And Secretary McCaw is on the line.
Yes.
And Mr. Luciano contacted me earlier and let me know he would not be able to attend.
Very good.
And Mr. Egan. Okay.
Julian, does that conclude the roll call?
Yes.
Great. And do we have a established quorum?
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, so we're going to move to the second item on our agenda for today, which is our public comment period. You'll recall that we do provide the opportunity for public comment at our full MAR board meetings, not at our subcommittee meetings. And so I'd like to open up that portion of the agenda. Members of the public that are attending the telephonic meeting can have an opportunity to speak. Before making your comments, you would state your name, wait for me to acknowledge you, and then you would limit your remarks to 2 minutes. We do have one individual who has signed up for public comment period, and that is Director Colleen Bailey from the West Haven Public Library. And so therefore, I would like to recognize you. You have the floor. Please press *6 to, very good, there you are.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe I had a letter that was sent previously, but I was going to read that for you all. Members of MARB and Mayor Rossi, I am writing to you today to ask if you would please reconsider the proposed cuts to the West Haven Library proposed during City Council's meeting on May 5th. The $200,000 cut would be a devastating loss to the library that will directly impact service at all levels to citizens of West Haven. The mayor's original proposed budget of $1.421 million, while difficult, would allow the library to function at similar levels before the COVID-19 outbreak, thanks in large part to the PPP loan of $138,940 we received in May. This cut will effectively shutter 2 out of the 3 library branches, reduce hours, and could potentially lead to laying off 1/3 of the staff, many of whom are tax-paying West Haven residents. When the library reopens our doors fully, we will be looking at the highest levels of unemployment since the Great Depression. Libraries are where citizens will turn for help applying for jobs, writing their resumes, and filing for unemployment. Last year alone, the library had over 184,000 visits to our 3 library branches. As a 501c3 organization, the Village Improvement Association has an endowment that is used for capital projects. These funds have saved the taxpayers millions of dollars over the last 15 years. The monies have been used for purchasing all of the computers and technology in the library, upgrading the HVAC system, and LED light changeover. In January, the VIA bid on the Allentown branch at a cost of $500,000, along with the developers putting in a much lower bid. Both bids were rejected, and the developer put in an additional bid, which was slightly higher than the previously at $325,000. The VIA understands the long-term outlook of increasing tax revenue for the city, but we also feel strongly that investing in an expanded library in Allentown is a valuable resource for the city. Please reconsider the devastating cuts to the library. West Haven taxpayers deserve a properly funded library. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bailey. Are there any other members of the public who would like to provide public comment today? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the approval of the minutes for the April 9th, 2020 regular meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved. Christine Shaw.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. A second, please. Please press *6 to unmute, and we'll be happy to take a second.
I'll second Mark Waxenberg.
Thank you, Mark. So the motion for approval of the minutes for April 9th has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
One discussion. If we could please, Julian, just add to the top of the minute that it must have fallen off, stating the meeting minutes on the top of the minutes.
Very good. So with the technical correction. Great. Any other discussion on the minutes before us today? Seeing none, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote on that. Julian?
Mr. Hamilton.
Aye.
Mr. White.
Aye.
Mr. Falsigno. We'll come back to Stephen. Mr. Waxenberg.
Yes.
Ms. Shaw.
Yes, in favor.
Secretary McCaw.
Yes.
And Mr. Falsigno.
Julian?
Yes.
Julian, this is
Yeah.
David Biller. I finally figured out that I had to hit *6. I thought just hitting mute on my phone worked. So I am here.
Oh,
Did
great.
say yes on the roll, but you may not have heard me, and I do approve. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you for that. And I see Stephen's unmuted, but he must be having another technical issue.
Well, he's not physically present for the vote, so I think we're going to reflect him as an abstention. and the minutes have still passed, correct, Julian?
Correct.
Okay, excellent. So before we go into our first city, I didn't give any opening remarks. I just want to say to everyone who's joined today, thank you so much for your patience. Obviously, we're all impacted by the new COVID environment that we work in, and with that comes some challenges that we can overcome, as evidenced by our meeting here today. But I do appreciate the commitment of the MARB board members, as well as the city officials that are here with us today. What is very noticeable is a significant presence from the West Haven council members, and so I just want to respectfully acknowledge your attendance today and thank you for what is coming across to be a very strong partnership from the what we'll call the legislative and the executive teams there. So welcome today. And to you, Mayor Rossi, greetings to you. The first item that we have pertaining to the City of West Haven is a subcommittee update. You do have a written update from Julian in your material, as well as a supplement based on a meeting that we held on Tuesday, May 19th. I would note that a number of the City Council members were present, many of whom that are on the call here today, as well as the fire district commissioners participated in the meeting. And I just have to note that there seems to be such a momentum in the City of West Haven from a leadership perspective, and I'm really glad to see that. The subcommittee did hear from Undersecretary Mike Walsh from OPM, who's been working with Kim Kennison and the team on the fire districts, providing a status on the fiscal 2021 budgets, as well as an update on the actuarial analyses that were prepared for the fire district pensions. And we just want to bring to your attention, we'll certainly have an opportunity at a future meeting to go in more detail, but the First Fire and West Shore have both taken very responsible steps in adjusting their budget to reflect cost and liabilities. They've increased their ADEC contribution to be more reflective of what the required investment is to be able to honor those pension contributions. They've adjusted and increased their OPEB contributions and have begun to really put some additional funds aside to meet their capital infrastructure. And with those changes, I would note that the budgets before the residents will reflect, or are proposed to reflect, a 1 mil increase for First Fire and a 0.75 increase for West Shore. And so as we talk about the West Haven budget later on the agenda, I wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of mill adjustments that are planned and proposed from the fire district perspective. I would say that the leadership of the fire districts, again, was very strong and committed to addressing some of the concerns that we've been working with them on for over a year. The subcommittee also reviewed the city's fiscal 2021 budget that has been approved by the City Council with some changes. We'll talk about the changes that the council made. And the subcommittee reviewed that budget with the benefit of the context of what was happening with pertaining to the fire district's budgets and the associated mill rate increases. The subcommittee for West Haven did vote to discharge the budget. That was as it was approved by City Council to the full MARB for approval, recognizing that MARB may consider other conditions in order to vote it out of the full board, such as contingent upon city's action on a 5-year plan. We also voted to recommend to the mayor that the 5-year plan, which had been discussed and vetted within the subcommittee, that the plan be submitted to the City Council for action. Mayor Rossi responsibly wanted to obtain the feedback of the subcommittee members before submitting the 5-year plan to City Council for a vote. We also advised the city that the council needs to evaluate the assumptions in the plan and determine if they can live with them or if they will want to make adjustments. There is a mill increase that is reflected in the 5-year plan in future years, and want to ensure that we're approving a plan that reflects the commitment of the leadership of the city. So with that, that is the update on the subcommittee, and I will open it up for any questions, but first, Julian, is there anything else that you would like to provide on the West Haven Subcommittee update?
No, I think if it's helpful, I can update when the specific items come up on the agenda under budget and 5-year plan and so forth.
Very good. All right. So, MARB members, are there any questions pertaining to the subcommittee update? Okay, seeing none, and if speak now, *6 to unmute, or we'll move right along. Okay, so the next item on the agenda will be the review, discussion, and possible action pertaining to the fiscal year 2021 budget. As I just indicated, the recommended budget has been reviewed by the subcommittee and at several meetings and was presented to the full MARB at the April meeting. City Council approved this budget with adjustments to the mayor's recommended budget on May 7th. The subcommittee did discharge the budget to the full MARB for consideration today. I am going to turn it over to Julian to give us a high-level summary and then give the city an opportunity to make remarks. So Julian, over to you.
Very good. So we received the mayor's recommended budget back in March. That budget reflected an overall increase of 1.4% over the current year budget. It was supported by a mill rate increase of 0.8 mils on real estate and personal property and a flat mill rate for motor vehicles at 37 mils. There was little change in other revenues, including aid from the state, which was budgeted flat and which was determined to be consistent with the second year of the state's biennial budget. There was little change in the other revenue sources, which make up a very small portion of the overall revenue picture. The plan, or the budget also relied on $4 million in restructuring funds, which is a slight reduction from the 4.1 million in the current year. It included a number of expenditures that are tied to other initiatives that the MARB has been involved with to varying degrees. These included the creation of a benefits coordinator position, the creation of a risk manager position, funding for outsourcing at least some elements of payroll and employee benefit management, and the health insurance budget reflected the shift to the partnership for our active employees. Overall, there were 7 new positions added and 3 eliminated for a net increase of 4 full-time positions. So in addition to the other ones that I just mentioned, there was funding for a patrol officer that was currently unfunded, addition of 2 building officials, a position in Corp Counsel's office, and the creation of a financial analyst. And then there were several positions eliminated: code enforcement officer, payroll clerk, and a revenue collection clerk. There was also some sort of shifting around of duties and some positions being renamed that didn't have an overall impact on full-time headcount. Pension was fully funded at the ADEC based on the updated valuation that was received in 2019. Debt service was based on existing debt plus a projected bond issue this summer for continued financing of the high school project. The city's contribution to education was held flat, although the Board of Education approved a budget that was $1.6 million higher than that, with the intent of funding the gap through anticipated additional ECS Alliance funding. Capital funding was held relatively flat in the recommended budget, and the budget also included a planned set aside of about $425,000 towards increasing fund balance. And then with regard to the fire budget, the Allingtown fire budget, there was no change in the mill rate. There was an addition of funding for a fire chief, which had been budgeted, I believe, for half the year in the current year budget and was funded in the FY21 budget. And we just want to make sure that this is brought to everybody's attention, given the context of the fire districts and the planning for a shift to an all-district structure in the future. So the subcommittee reviewed the budget as proposed on April 1st. The full MARB was briefed on April 9th. On April 28th, the subcommittee reviewed it again with alongside the draft 5-year plan that had been put together. Some guidance was offered to the city by the subcommittee. The recommendations from the subcommittee at that point were to, many of them revolved around planning for contingencies and considering the potential hit to tax collection rates, potential impact on the pension trusts and future ADEC requirements, and just general uncertainty around economic conditions going forward. The subcommittee also urged a higher mill rate for FY21 with the expectation that it may be more difficult to make mill rate adjustments in the subsequent year. The City Council approved the budget on May 7th with a number of changes. Overall, the additions were roughly offset by reductions. There's a minor overall net decrease of $6,000, but generally offsetting changes. The result was no change to the mill rate. It did represent a shift from capital and certain other expenses to contingency and to the set aside for fund balance. And I'll just tick off some of the changes that were made in the City Council's approved budget. There was a 20% reduction to all overtime accounts. There was a reductions that represent delaying the filling of several positions, a procurement position, a patrol officer position, and a detective position. There's a new IT position that was eliminated. There was a reduction to the street lighting account of $100,000. We heard earlier about the reduction to the library account. This was a reduction of $200,000, but $100,000 was then moved into the City Council as sort of a contingency for the library. And I believe there are certain conditions around releasing that funding to the library. There are reductions to banking fees, postage, and the largest single reduction was really to the capital program, the $230,000. I mentioned that these were largely offset by additions. Most of the additions were building those amounts back into the contingency accounts. So the unallocated contingency was increased by $230,000. There was the creation of an overtime contingency that roughly equates to the amount that was reduced from individual accounts. The fund balance set aside was increased from $425,000 to $616,000. There was an addition to the advanced funding of OPEB from $75,000 to $125,000. And there was funding built back in to outsource certain information technology services. And then there were several studies that are funded in the budget as well. A police pension study, a parking study, and an information technology study. So overall, it's really just a reallocation of resources within the budget. No change to the mill rate. On the fire side, there was also a 20% reduction to overtime that was then built back into the contingency account. There was no change to the plan for the fire chief position. So Tuesday, the subcommittee met again, reviewed those changes, had the extensive conversation with the city council members and representatives from the fire districts who were able to review the budget in the context of the sort of the full picture of tax rate changes. The secretary mentioned that the first district is proposing a 1 mil increase. The West Shore district is proposing a 3/4 mil increase. Those, of course, would be in addition to the city's general fund increase of 0.8 mils as it stands now. And as the secretary mentioned, the committee voted to move the budget forward for consideration by the full MARB, expecting that the approval may be contingent on certain conditions being met, such as city council approval of a 5-year plan. And that concludes my summary, Secretary.
Thank you very much, Julian. Mayor Rossi, are there any brief remarks that you'd like to provide with respect to your proposed budget and the changes that the council has put forth? Just a reminder to star 6 to unmute.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I am pleased that some of the shift of money was to unallocated contingency, because I do believe that that is important. I also understood from the beginning that that the MARB was not going to go with a lower mill rate. So I'm glad that after certain cuts were made, that they were restored in time to bring the mill rate back to the 0.8, which was originally in my budget. I do have some concerns, as I had stated during the subcommittee meeting, and that is as far as the police department with certain lease payments, and also the library as well. My understanding is from Ms. Bailey that and it's been on Facebook and everything else, that if they don't get the funding back, that they will have to close 2 branches. And then the IT position is of concern to me as well, because we have a one-man show here, and he's been wonderful because he's the one who's setting up the meetings. Him and I worked together to get cameras in here before the pandemic started, being very proactive, and we were very fortunate that we were able to get up and running with very little hesitation. I also do want to commend the city and everyone around me for sticking with the charter required deadlines, not only for the presentation of the budget on time, but for the city council continuing that initiative to have a public hearing on time per our charter, and to have the budget passed on time so that we can get our tax bills out in the same manner and time frame that we did. So, and as far as the 5-year plan, my understanding is from the chairman that will appear on the Tuesday night agenda meeting night, and I'm assuming for action. So I'm hopeful that we can get a feel of where the council feels about the 5-year plan, and if there's any changes, we still have a little time to do that, and possibly bring it back to the MAR board if necessary. So that's all I have to say. I'm going to turn it over to Frank now, if Frank has any concerns about the budget.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I think a lot of my concerns were addressed by the mayor. The IT position, particularly, I know we've added outsourcing funding so effectively we swapped out a 5-day-a-week technician new hire for a 1-day-a-week consultant to come in, which concerns me, given the fact that we have put together a capital plan to finally start upgrading the IT infrastructure here in the city. The only other area that I think is a major concern to me is the delaying of the purchasing individual for 6 months. As the secretary can attest to, I having problems trying to get everything out on time now without having to pick up some of the duties of the purchasing agent. Other than that, I think the council, I commend them for whatever cuts they made were put back into the contingency area, so there was no attempt to actually reduce the mill rate. And I think other than that, I think it's a pretty sound budget that we could probably work with. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mayor and Frank. I will echo Frank's remarks. Obviously, the ability for the city to achieve the fiscal sustainability is having, the staff in place to deliver on, items that the MARB asked for. But quite frankly, if you weren't under MARB direction, these are things that you would be doing as a part of normal course. So I'm not sure who intends to pick up the purchasing functions, but if that's going to the finance director position, that is of concern, as it seems like it is still a heavy load to meet the deliverables, at least of what is expected by MARB, and certainly a lot of the corrective action areas that have been identified through audit, as well as the efficiency-related matters, they all seem to have some connection back to finance. So that particular change does give me a little pause for concern. But I would like to open it up to the MARB members to ask questions about the budget. So anyone who'd like to have discussion, please identify yourself and you'll have the floor.
So this is Mark Waxenberg. I'm going to focus on the health insurance side, Frank, or whoever, and come back to the library issue that was stated by the mayor and the director. But let me first talk about or ask some questions about the insurance account. If you don't have the answers, that's fine. You can submit them to the secretary or to the subcommittee. Not being on the subcommittee, I don't want to supersede their deep dive, but I do have some questions. In 54110, and I don't want to go by page because online is different than the budget. But 54110 is your account for health insurance. You apparently split that account now between actives and retirees on the municipal side. On the 54110, it's claim partnership for about $5.5 million. What groups are in that piece, Frank? And do you have an idea of how many bodies that is? And the same question of, let's just do that one first. And I don't want to prolong the meeting. I just want, if you don't have the number at the top of your head, or obviously you may not, just understand that I'm trying to identify who all is where.
Okay, Mr. Waxenberg, that's a great question. The partnership plan number was built off of using the first 3 months of actual billings that we got from the state. Currently, it includes the city employees. It does not include, Allentown wouldn't be reflected here either anyway, but it includes all city employees, including Public Works and the police. There are currently a total of, I want to say 257 people enrolled in the plan. And that's, I can provide to you a breakdown of the particular unions and whether they are, single, family, or couple. But
Frank, I think I have that in the back, but that's fine. The only reason I asked that is because the police are not in the partnership plan. I believe that when they negotiated the contract, they stayed with the Blue Cross, I think it was even the PPO. Is that accurate?
No, the police were moved to the partnership plan, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, then I may have misread their collective bargaining agreement. That's fine. That's fine.
In the 5-year plan document, you'll see the union is 895.
Okay.
And that has a breakdown of what makes up those costs.
Okay. And continuing, Madam Chair, if I might, on the retiree side, you split it out. Last time you said you budgeted for 23% increase on the retiree side. Is that what you're carrying into this budget based on Lockton's analysis for you?
That is correct. We decided it would be prudent to use the higher percentage until we figure out whether or not the Board of Education is actually moving to the partnership plan. I did not want to go with a lower number and then have to eat that cost.
Right. No, well, that's, obviously. And are you aware of the retention fee that Lockton is getting from Anthem? That's usually about a 1 or 2%. You probably wouldn't be aware of the board side. And now that they've moved to the partnership, I don't think that Lockton would be getting well, they might be getting a retention fee from built into their costs on the retirees. But is anybody aware of what the retention fee is that Lockton is getting from Anthem?
Currently, I do not. I know prior to movement, I believe that number was somewhere in the 150 range, 150,000 for the city.
And you okay? So that's been adjusted. On the Allentown health insurance side, 54110. If anybody can speak to it within its budget, I noticed that on FY19, the actual was this is health insurance again, was roughly 1.3 million, and the 20 budget, which was this year's, was 1.65 million. Does anybody have an idea? And are they self-insured also, or are they fully insured?
Yeah, it's Lee Tarrant, Corporation Counsel, Mr. Waxenberg. I'm going to be leaving this meeting at 11 on a conference call concerning just that issue of them going to the partnership plan. Right now, they're in the high deductible plan. And we would hope.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, then I'll forego all the questions, because there was a significant increase of over 350 from 19 to 20. So, and I'm sure you're examining all of that within the confines of your discussion. That was a concern. So I'll delay all of the Allentown health insurance questions until you report back as to your conversations with them on the partnership. So that's it for me on health insurance, Madam Chair. But can I comment on the library, please?
Yes, sir.
The mayor has a concern, and listening to the director, I also, again, not trying to substitute the discussion that may have occurred at the subcommittee level or even at the city council level. The concern I have is that we are probably going to suffer through this virus issue for a period of time that's going to impact the community as a whole, and certainly the school system. And one of the resources that citizens and children and the school system are going to need as a supplement to their regular school side regular instruction for the elementary level possibly, and certainly for the research that may be necessary to do any kind of job searches for those that don't have the technology at home, are going to have to be carried by the community, unfortunately, which is going to require a public service known as libraries. And to be reducing libraries and putting money in contingencies, which I understand may be necessary because of the unknown, I have serious concerns about whether I make an amendment to restore the $200,000 back into the budget or not. I'm still mulling over in my mind, but I want to give you my initial thoughts about that community resource that is going to be, in my mind, so essential to any community, especially in West Haven's community, to again be of services to the students that are going to probably have a disruption of instruction, and to the citizenry at large that's going to have to be seeking some help when it comes to job outlooks and things of that nature. So I share the mayor's concern in that area specifically, and may be offering an amendment to restore that money at the appropriate time. But I just wanted to give you my rationale. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, this is Michael Milone. I think I can answer a couple of Mr. Waxenberg's questions if there's time. on the medical
Well,
benefits?
I would like to, I believe the questions pertaining to the general fund budget have been addressed. And I'd like to hold if we're talking about fire district budgets, because I want to ensure that other MARB members have a chance to comment. We're 45 minutes into the agenda.
So
Thank you.
if I may, David Biller here, am I unmuted?
You are.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So very quickly, I did want to echo what Mr. Waxenberg just said, and particularly with regards to the library. I have 3 kids at home of varying ages that are going through this homeschooling. I don't know what the outlook is for the summer. I don't know what the outlook is for the fall. My kids, thankfully, are fortunate enough to have access to computers and other resources to be able to keep up with most of their homeschooling from home. Not all are as fortunate. I can certainly see the public library as being an invaluable resource, not only for research, but also computer access for people that perhaps don't have that sort of technology at home. And I think that, and again, I don't know where I stand with regards to the final budgeting, similar to Mr. Waxenberg, but I think that is definitely something that should be looked at and treated as a priority to continue to fund moving forward. That's it.
Mr. Miller, thank you very much for your comments. Other comments and discussion?
Yeah, this is Tom Hamilton. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tom, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm first of all want to echo your earlier comments in terms of applauding the work of the city council and the leadership of the city and the mayor in I think bringing forward a plan that by and large I think this represents a strong plan. I think I'm happy to see that they were willing to stick with the mill rate increases that were planned. Personally, I think that the move of putting some additional funds or transferring some funds into contingency is probably a wise thing to do under the current circumstance. And I did want to raise an issue, and it's a rather big one, and that is, given the severe recession that we now essentially are in, I do have some concerns about whether or not the collection rate on taxes is ultimately achievable in this current environment. I think the number that I see in there is 98.4% collection rate. So I would like to hear from the team, whether it's Julian or Michael Malone or Frank, in terms of was there any consideration given to whether or not there ought to be any adjustment to that collection rate? And do we have data on, I think we had been looking at a 3-year average collection rate as what we were keying in on, which in a normal time, I would wholeheartedly support that. But I do have some concern here. Do we know in prior recessions, if we go back to 2008, do we have any data on what kind of impact there was on tax collection rate? And where does that 98.4% stand in relation to that?
Frank, I have the data here. This is Michael. If you want me to speak to that, or if you want to.
No, go ahead, Michael, because I think we came to the same number using different methodologies. So go ahead.
Okay. Tom, we looked at the collection rates going back about 18 years. And when we went back to the last recession, the collection rate for 2007 was 98.17. In 2008, it dropped to 97.53, a reduction of 0.64%. And then the following year, in 2009, it went back up to 98.25%. So using that as sort of a historical framework is how we proceeded. What surprised me was that the drop in the collection rate was not more dramatic. And then what we did was Frank and I looked at the last 10 years of collection, which have averaged about 98.3%. We then looked at the last 5 years, which is 98.44, and the last 3 years, which are 98.33. So it didn't show much of a variation in the last 10 years. And during the recession in 2008, 9, and 10, it declined, but not significantly, and then came right back. So I don't know how indicative that is of what's likely to happen. But just by way of information too, for every 0.1% that collection rate is reduced, it represents about $99,700, just so you understand what it means financially. So that's basically how Frank and I looked at this and stayed with what he had recommended in the plan.
And Michael, if I can just, it's Melissa, Secretary McCaw, if I could just ask, when you look at the real estate property tax collections, what percentage comes directly from mortgage companies as opposed to direct payments by taxpayers? Do you have a sense of that?
No, I don't have that number. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No.
Secretary McCaw, this is Frank. Roughly 50% of tax collections come from escrowed accounts.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, this is Tom Hamilton. I did want to, thank you for that explanation. I think, that does give me more comfort that the 98.4 is a number that is not unreasonable based on everything we know at this point. But it is certainly an area that I think the city should and the MARB board should watch closely and be ready to potentially make mid-year adjustments if necessary, if it looks like that number is not achievable because of the economy.
Absolutely, I completely concur.
This is Christine Shaw with a follow-up question. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You have the floor, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you. Has the city considered any forbearance for its residents in terms of the payment of property taxes? If it hasn't, is it on the table?
I'll yield to Corp Counsel for that.
Thank you, Member Shaw. I consulted with the City Council on this. We have a abatement program where people apply for tax abatement generally, and then we review the financial need for such an abatement program and whether or not they get relief. Obviously, we also we have some abatement in terms of development. But this was discussed with council when the council approved the 3% change in the interest collection as opposed to the deferment. And it was the view of the council that we could still review deferment requests based on this through our existing abatement program. Now, we recognize, and I mentioned to council, obviously they have to be prepared that it might require a little more volunteer work to evaluate those claims, because you may get a lot more claims than you normally have. But they are on board on that. They understood that when they passed the low interest rate provision that the governor proposed.
Ms. Shaw, does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so there's no specific outreach to homeowners with respect to the COVID disruption? I mean, I'm just curious. I take it to mean that the existing abatement program is still on the table, but has there been any other outreach or acknowledgement that there may be other extraordinary circumstances that homeowners face?
We haven't found that homeowners who have stress in paying their taxes are shy about communicating that to us. We did put legal notice in about the insurance deferment. I mean, we could do more outreach. I mean, the only reason we pretty strenuously evaluated the 90-day deferment, and unfortunately, it was viewed that our cash flow situation just wouldn't allow for the risk that we wouldn't have the cash flow, and we'd have to float those short-term bonds, tax redemption bonds. So, we have to be a little careful. We're in a little different situation than other municipalities. But, we have a local paper, so we can certainly put communications in the local paper to make sure people step up if they have the need. And we have 13 counselors who talk with members in their districts, so I'm sure they're going to communicate to their respective voters and constituents as to whether or not people need to step up and communicate to us as to whether or not they have a need in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion?
Yes, Secretary McQuarrie, Patrick Egan.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Patrick.
I'll go after Patrick.
All right, Patrick, you have the floor.
Thank you. Just some clarification for Mr. Milone. So the collection rate is speculated at 98.4 for this year. What was the? I know you went through a 3-year, a 5-year, 10-year average or whatever it was. What was the? What are we basing the 98.4 on? A 3-year average, or what was the 3-year average?
Okay. Yeah, the 3-year average was 98.33. We looked at a 5-year average, which was 98.44, and the 10-year average was 98.365. And so that's why we felt pretty comfortable keeping it at the 98.4.
And what was you were at a 97 what in 08?
In 08, let me just take that file. In 08, the collection rate was 97.53%. And then in 09, it's better to tell you the year before. 07 was 98.17. And then it dropped in 08 to 97.53%, a drop of 0.64%. And then in 09, it went up to 98.25%, an increase of 0.72. So it rebounded pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so a couple overall concerns. One, I support what Mark was saying with regard to the library. In New Haven, we've actually, in the budget, they've actually added some positions, even though, we're clearly looking at a tax increase and these are difficult times. But the library in our community, which is somewhat similar to West Haven's, is really such an essential service. That's number one. Number two is the purchasing agent position. I mean, that is really a position that is going to help make sure things are streamlined and there's cost efficiencies. I would think that should be filled ASAP and not deferred. The other issue I have is, when you look at what the estimation is for a tax collection rate this year, obviously the 3-year average is a little bit lower than that. So is the 10-year. The 5-year is a tiny bit higher. But when you go back to, to me, I think take into account 08 and look at the circumstances we're under now, and possibly the issues rearing its head again in the fall, as a lot of experts possibly speculate. 98.4 seems to be taking the most generous scenario without an outlier of what's going on right now. And I think it's a little, a little too generous to estimate a 98.4 collection rate when there's so many factors that say it probably won't be that, and there's things that could roll out in the next 5 months that could, kind of take a hit to the community, the state, the country again.
Madam Secretary, it's Lee Tiernan, and if I may, I want to point out something that Frank and Mike Malone wouldn't know, and I tried to get them communication to this before.
Go right ahead, Lee. Very briefly, sir. Go right ahead.
This is quick. So among our other problems in West Haven, the FBI raided our public housing authority in 2012. And in addition to the other problems that resulted in that raid, they weren't paying their pilot payment. So their pilot payment is reflected in that lost revenue. Now that's a pretty significant amount. It's usually about $250,000. So that should also be reflected. If that's reflected in that, the drop in revenue is even less significant than it would otherwise have been. So that's been remedied. They pay their pilot payment on time. That's obviously money that comes from the federal government. We don't anticipate it dropping. So I just think the board should understand and know that in reviewing this. Thanks.
All right.
Can I
Go right ahead. Yes, you have the floor.
Okay, and I don't want to really belabor this, but I have to agree with Mr. Egan. And I said this the other day at the subcommittee meeting. I felt that 98% was overly aggressive. I think you do have to go back because I think these are unconventional times, and I don't think using a 5-year average makes sense. I think you have to go back to 2008, and that's just my thought as far as your collection rate. The other thing I'm most interested in, if you're unpleasantly surprised and you're not right at the 98%, my hope and thought is that you have a plan to react as quickly as possible so that we're not going back to common sources to right the mistake. So I'm interested in what your plan is if you're wrong.
Can I speak to that a little bit? It's Michael Malone.
So before you do that, let me give some general remarks. I mean, and then you can certainly very briefly, and we're halfway through the meeting and we haven't covered half the agenda and only one for West Haven, so we're gonna have to move this along. But let me just say the following. Clearly using the multi-year average methodology, you picked the more generous tax collection rate. And I think it is not unreasonable. All municipalities are it is not unreasonable for the MARB members to question that assumption. And I appreciate that you did go back and take a look at the experience from the last downturn and the impact it had on the tax collection rate. I do think that was one of the questions that came up in subcommittee. But all municipalities are struggling and grappling with the uncertainty of the pandemic on their tax collection rates. You know, I would distinguish 2008 and 2009 as being different than what the economists forecast for the COVID-related economic impact. Obviously, we hope that with the reopening of the state and hopefully reopening those closed sectors of our economy, that businesses will get back up and running, that they will reemploy their workers, which should reduce the unemployment claims and help your constituents to be able to pay their taxes. I think the actions on the part of the federal government to provide stability throughout the nation, the Paycheck Protection Program for your businesses, and the very generous unemployment benefits. In some respects, they're so generous, folks might not want to return, but that's another story. I just want to distinguish that this is not likely to be 2008, 2009. But that being said, many municipalities are thinking about contingency plans, and you'll recall that OPM put out a survey to municipalities, not only to collect the COVID-related expenses you're incurring to help support with stimulus dollars, but also to get a sense of what the cash position is and the deferral and what impact that might have, as well as some assumptions surrounding impacts to the tax collection rate. So I think the members that have brought that forward do bring forth a valid concern, and your ability to navigate if those assumptions are not correct and how you respond to that right now, I think is very important. So, Michael, if you want to respond, or Frank, if you see the discount rate down by a 0.5 percentage point that you have not accounted for, what is the contingency plan? What is the financial impact, and what is the contingency plan?
I don't mean to speak for Frank, so I should defer to him. And then if there's any comments that need to be supplemented, I'll supplement them.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah.
So Frank, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, it's a great question. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen. There could be no impact. There could be massive impact. I don't have a plan that currently that lays out if there's a 2%, 4%, 5%, what do we do? It's something that I'm working on. We just don't have it ready right now.
And Frank, go ahead, Michael.
And you know, I will work with Frank on that. And Frank and I did the medical benefit analysis separately and then reconciled our differences. And first of all, I think we're going to have a little bit of a cushion there, which we didn't expect simply because we used, I think, a 7.5% rate increase for the state plan when in fact it came in somewhere between 3 and 4%. Frank also was very conservative in the increase of 24% for the retirees. We later found out that the rate we can use is the mutualized rate, which is 8%. So there's a pretty healthy difference there. And also, Mr. Waxenberg, that explains why the fire department had such a large increase, because we were using the larger of the two assumptions that Anthem gave us, when in reality we could now use the lower assumption of about 8%. And the last thing, and I know this sounds like maybe pie in the sky, but Frank and I have been working pretty hard on some revenue opportunities. One in particular is the charging of indirect costs to the multitude of agencies that use city resources that do not reimburse for any of those services. And that can be substantial, maybe $200,000 to $400,000. And the other thing that the mayor has been working on and asked me to take a lead on is the creation of an enterprise zone in West Haven, which would then allow the city to increase the real estate conveyance tax. Every 0.5% that's increased generates about $120,000. So there's a lot of things that, if they materialize, will add further cushions. In the process of lowering that collection rate, unfortunately, the reality, unless there's money in other places, is that it has to be made up on the mill rate. And I think that's why Frank and I were so sensitive to that, and I think that's why everybody else is.
All right, so basically what I heard you say is that the only thing in what you provided, from my opinion, that gave me any comfort was that you built in some cushion into the medical inflation of the 7%, and the retirees rate is lower. So the other items are great. It's kind of like your efficiency savings. Maybe they happen, maybe they don't. But you're saying you have a little bit of padding elsewhere in the budget. Do you know what that amounts to, and how much of a reduction in tax collection rate would that cushion, be able to sustain you for?
In the medical benefits?
Yes, sir.
I think it's probably in the neighborhood of $600,000 to $700,000.
And what about the retiree rate?
I think I didn't calculate the fire, but I think most of that increase in Allentown is directly attributable to that. But I can't say that for certain because I haven't looked at those numbers recently.
Okay. All right, so between the medical benefit and who knows what happens with medical experience, and the contingency that you've built in, Frank, what reduction in tax collection rate can you sustain?
Well, as Michael stated, if we do see down in the low to mid 97s, it could be anywhere from $800,000 to $900,000 impact. Given the mill rate. Push comes to shove, we'd have to use some of that fund balance increase that's been built into the contingency. And other than that, the only thing to do is, if you crank down the mill rate, or the collection rate, it's going to crank up the mill rate. So people that could barely make it at the new mill rate are going to.
We understand that. I just need the technical response. So Frank, what you said is that basically with the extra cushion you've built in on contingency and on medical, you could sustain a tax collection rate going from the budgeted amount to maybe, you were at 97.4? Correct me if I'm wrong.
We're at
98.4.
98.4. You could probably go down to 97, high 97s. What are you thinking?
97.5 to 97.6. We should be able to cut.
Okay, so, MARB members and those that were concerned about this, they have almost a 1 percentage point cushion built in here, and the choice is to send this budget back and ask for that reduction. I expect you're probably going to reduce medical and contingency to account for that, or look for other cuts, or acknowledge that there are some areas that likely have some favorability that would have to offset any changes in tax collection. Obviously, July will, the early part of the fiscal year, they'll have a good look at what potentially is happening, and any organization needs to be able to mitigate if you find that the assumptions are not moving in the right direction. So, Stephen, Mr. Biller, Patrick, thoughts on the flexibility that they have baked into this budget to be able to withstand some of that tax collection downturn if that were to occur? And then we'll move this to a vote.
Yeah, Madam Secretary Bob White, I will be willing to make a motion to approve the budget. But before we do that, I'd like a couple of questions because I think they'll be relevant to that. Number one, I believe that we should have a condition on approving the budget that it be subject to approval of a plan at our, I'm assuming, at our June meeting. And that would give the city time, the mayor and the council time to work on that plan. We did, I think, at the subcommittee, note that the FY22 was a difficult problem because it called for a 1 mil increase in an election year, and at least the first cut was that there was not a lot of fat in the budget. So they've got some work to do. But again, I echo that the collaboration has been just, it has been terrific, and I applaud that. But the second issue is a question regarding the concerns about the library. I'm wondering if in the contingency account there is a mechanism if the leadership in the city concludes that adding money back to the library midterm, that money could come from a contingency account. From what I understand, there's 100 there. There's apparently some conditions. I don't want to get into the back and forth between council and the library on those conditions, but there's another 100 there, and the question would be whether that contingency could be used to fund it if the leadership decides that, for the reasons everyone's indicated, that that's necessary. So if we could deal with those two questions, and then I would be prepared to move or second approval of the budget with a condition.
So to answer your question, Mr. White, I'll take the second question first. There is a process within the charter that does allow us to move monies between departments. So the $100,000 that is being held in the city council budget specific to the library can be moved back again. Right. Yeah. That would be moved within the last quarter of the year. And the same with contingency. So we have the opportunity and the ability to move those monies around should the council deem that needed.
Great. Thank you, Frank. And I just want to say that I echo the concerns on the library as well, obviously from the perspective of it being extremely valuable resource for those that will be seeking to gain employment, albeit there are other resources throughout the state that they can utilize But I would also note that, the governor continues to express concerns about and continuing to maintain support for remote learning. And obviously, works for some children and it doesn't work for all children. And so the library as a valuable resource is something that I think is very important to the community. That being said, it is a policy and service level decision for the leadership of the city. I will remind us that our jurisdiction for reviewing this budget is pertaining to the revenue assumptions and the financial sustainability of the city. And while we might not all agree with that decision, I can't say that it puts the city in a position where they're not moving forward in that regard. Unlike areas like procurement that do have an impact on the finance team being able to deliver on their necessary requirements, as well as IT, because we put forth a lot of expectations around bolstering the IT system for efficiencies. So I appreciate that there's a mechanism for management to decide if they want to move in a different direction. With that, I do think that we've spent a
quick question. I apologize. I just need a little bit of clarification. So what you're saying is with David Biller.
Thank you.
So again, echoing sentiments of what I said before, the library being a priority, what you're saying is that there's really nothing that we can do voting for or against this particular budget that will impact whether or not the library continues to be funded or not, and it's left to the city. I just want to be clear.
That is correct. If we were making a vote where they couldn't sustain, if we were voting on something we didn't agree with and it was going to create a deficit and it's directly tied to the validity of this budget, that's one thing. But I think it's stepping outside of our statutory ability to direct the city from a service policy perspective. So if they had gimmicked the library line. If they had gimmicked the library line and we knew it was going to create a deficit and was not sound budgeting, then I think we'd have the ability to weigh in on that. But if it's really about service levels and values and what's important to the city, that really is up to the leadership of the mayor and the council, and not this board. But I think our comments are fair. All right. So with that, you're most welcome. Yes.
Madam Secretary, I'd concur with your observation. It's the equivalent of a line item veto, which I think we are tasked with focusing on the structural challenges or elements of the budget. And as compelling as the arguments that have been made today, I personally am a big supporter of libraries. I don't think the circumstances for us substituting our judgment for that of those who put the budget together. I also just wanted to comment on points that have been made, but just to underscore them. We're about 12 weeks into an unprecedented turndown, and as you pointed out, Madam Secretary, everyone is trying to grapple with the precise implications, and my concerns is that these margins are so razor thin, and while I appreciate the very earnest efforts to try to anticipate and to create contingencies and allow the city to adapt to the unknown, I'm concerned that an inordinate emphasis on details which have yet to be fleshed out, I just reasonably expect that we're going to have to come back to the drawing board once we have a better sense of the actual impacts on revenues. And so, again, sticking to a macro-oriented kind of oversight role seems to be the most pragmatic in this instance, because there remain so many unknowns that I think this is an overall restructuring of the town's approach to finances against the backdrop of what has never been seen in our lifetimes. And so I think some deference to the mayor, the council, and the finance folks who are really knee deep in this and elbow deep is warranted in this instance.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. So with that, I'm going to bring this to a vote. The motion that I'm raising is a motion to approve the City of West Haven fiscal year 2021 budget contingent upon the submission and ratification of the 5-year plan by the City Council.
Madam Secretary, just a point of clarification. The 5-year plan has to come back before us for approval, correct? After the city council?
That is correct.
And
we could choose to approve the 5-year plan contingent upon the council taking action. We can wait. We have that choice. That's the next item on the agenda. But yes, would come back to us to ensure that that the council was committed to the broader plan. Obviously, fiscal 21 is the base year, first base year in that plan.
And so fiscal 21 is part of the 5-year plan, and this is a different 5-year plan that was then approved by us previously. Under the statute or policies, do we need to have approval of the multi-year plan to issue restructuring funds?
Yes, we do. It is a condition of being able to provide restructuring funds to municipalities.
So if we approve this budget, but then didn't approve the 5-year plan, we then wouldn't be able to issue restructuring funds for fiscal year 21, correct?
For fiscal 21, and if you'll recall, we just finalized the memorandum of agreement on the restructuring funds for fiscal 20 because of some of the delays in getting that 5-year plan to approval. So no restructuring funds would be established in a contractual vehicle until the 5-year plan is approved by the council and then approved by this body. So I do not enter into any contract until that takes place. But we do want to continue to push this forward, and since we are by and large supportive of the fiscal 21 budget, we should move that with an understanding that that it is contingent upon the 5-year plan being ratified by the body and also approved by this board.
But if it wasn't approved by this board, then the fiscal 21 budget would be out of balance.
The fiscal 21 budget would then not be approved by this board because our approval would be contingent upon the approval of the council and then action by this board to approve the 5-year plan. So the 21 budget will be based on linked directly to the council approving the 5-year plan. So if they choose not to approve it, then our motion reflects then that the fiscal 21 budget would not be approved. Does that clarify for you, sir? Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? I'm going to restate the motion. All right. The motion is to approve City of West Haven's fiscal 21 budget contingent upon the approval of the 5-year plan by West Haven City Council. Does anyone want to move that motion?
Did you need someone to officially make that motion, or is it already on the table?
It's on the table. I need someone to move it.
Okay, I will move it. This is Tom Hamilton.
Thank you, sir.
Bob White, I'll second.
All right. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, this is Mark Waxenberg.
Yes, sir.
The understanding I have right now is, though we're moving this budget, we all understand that for all intent and purposes, there are variances within this budget that will be adjusted. For example, the health insurance piece, which we know is inflated, the tax collection rate, which we believe is high. So what we are doing, which is fine with me, and also the concern about the library, which I believe the mayor has heard, and hopefully will work with the council and the library to restore those services in one way, shape, or form, but that's up to them from a policy perspective. So this budget, basically, as we approve it, is, I don't want to say not balanced, it is, but it is not fully reflective of certain areas that could be adjusted. And I don't have a problem with that because we're in a state of flux here anyway. But in my own mind, I just have to satisfy my vote by approving a budget that calls for a 0.8 mil increase with adjustments possibly to be made accordingly as the budget proceeds through implementation. Is that fair?
That is fair. Through our statutory responsibility, Mark, to monitor the financial operations of the city, if we begin to see reports that the tax collection rates are not coming in as expected, then we will be directing the city to begin to reflect a contingency plan, and we will say, okay, let's reflect that we're taking some funds from contingency, or that medical's coming in lower, or that they might have to hold on the hiring of the refill position. So yes, you are correct. We are approving this budget with the 98.4 tax collection rate, acknowledging that there is a lot of uncertainty, but that there are some known areas within this budget that could help to offset any surprises.
Thank you.
Yes,
Madam Secretary.
Can I interject something, Madam Chair?
Okay, first Bob White.
Yes, just a question on timing. That your motion said it had to be ratified by the council. It did not say it had to be approved by us, although the consequences of not approving what the council has modified means there's no funds there out of, but I'm not quite sure what the timetable is. I'm assuming there's a June 30 deadline. I may be wrong, but what is the procedure by which the council will ratify something? Hopefully that they've got some conversations to have, and then bringing it back to the MARB for approval. What's that timetable like? I don't want to tie us up in a knot.
Very good. It is our expectation from our subcommittee meeting that Mayor Rossi, and we directed her to submit the plan to the council. It is our expectation that they would take action by June 30th, so that they'd actually have a budget in place. Now, with respect to our approval of the 5-year plan, that is the next item on the agenda. And we could consider a motion that we will approve that item after the council takes action. We could consider a motion that we approve it contingent upon council approval. That is up on next on the agenda, Bob.
Oh, okay. I was just assuming that there's going to be a change to what is in front of us, but I may be ahead of myself.
Change to the 5-year plan?
Correct. There was some reluctance about the mill rate of one for 2000 for FY22, and that might involve a trade-off with the expenses. But that's the mayor's plan, and you know I leave that to discussion over this Memorial Day weekend, because no one's going anywhere.
Very good. Very good. All right. Any other discussion on the motion that's been moved and seconded? I thought there was one other person. Okay. If there, no...
I think that was me. This is Steve Felsig now. I can't express how uncomfortable I am with that collection rate of 98%, especially when we have history in 2008 where it's a full point lower, and we don't know how bad this could be. And I'm just someone that always likes to err on the side of caution. So that's just food for thought. That's just me.
Any other discussion? You should your vote should reflect that if you're uncomfortable. Respectfully, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, then we're going to call a roll call vote.
Okay. Mr. Egan.
No.
Mr. Biller.
No.
Ms. Shaw.
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg.
Yes.
Mr. White.
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yes.
Mr. Felsigno.
No.
Secretary McCaw,
Yes.
that's everybody. That's 5 yeses and 3 nos.
Okay, the motion passes. All right, very good. So recognizing that we are an hour and a half into our agenda, I first just want to ask MARB members on their flexibility for going longer than what was originally scheduled. Do we have any concerns?
Yeah, Tom, this is Tom Hamilton. I've got a hard stop, unfortunately.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Okay, all right. Let's move on to the 5-year plan for the City of West Haven. Julian, why don't you give us a high-level summary? You'll recall the draft plan was submitted to the subcommittee. The city we've had extensive conversations with the city, and as Mr. White indicated, there were concerns raised in subcommittee about the commitment and willingness of city leadership to move forward and to fully support the mill rate that is in the plan. Obviously, we do not want to take action on a plan that is not realistic and that we get to next year and there's a battle over implementing. So those conversations have been had. City Council leadership is on the call today. They did express a general sentiment of commitment, recognizing, however, that the mayor had not yet submitted the plan for their detailed review. And the subcommittee did favorably vote a resolution to have the mayor recommend the mayor to submit that plan expeditiously for council's consideration. So with that, Julian, I'm going to turn it over to you for some high-level components of the plan.
Thank you. Very quickly, the 5-year plan, of course, begins with the base year of FY21, which corresponds to the budget we just reviewed. The overall revenues increase by 1.6% in the following year and then level off in the out years. The reliance on restructuring funds goes to $2 million in year 2 of the plan, and then at that point is completed and phased out. We have a mill rate increase in year 2 of about $1 million and smaller increases in the out years, and in the final year, actually a modest reduction. Bear with me a second. I was looking for the fund balance projections. The fund balance projections achieved the 5% target by FY23, which is consistent actually with the original plan. And the plan does reflect that after FY23, we see the dropping off of the pension obligation bonds that were issued years ago, and creates a substantial amount of capacity within the city's finances. I'll defer to the mayor and Mr. Chaplinsky to add in any additional detail.
Good morning again, Nancy Rossi. I just wanted to add to make sure that I was clear and all the members know. I did submit the 5-year plan. My understanding from this morning's conversation with the chairman, Quagliani, that plan will be on the May 26th regular council meeting for review, and I'm hopeful action. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Saplinski, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think everything is pretty comprehensive. As Julian mentioned, you'll see in the document that we've broken out the debt service by project, and you'll be able to see that in fiscal 23, it's roughly a $5.8 million reduction related to those pension bond obligations.
Great. I'd like to open it up for discussion. I do not propose that we take action on the 5-year plan. but certainly can discuss it if you'd like to do so. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, Bob White, just a note, since we're not going to be voting on this, I think the way we left the meeting, the subcommittee meeting, and I think it was really one of the most productive West Haven meetings that I've certainly attended, is that I think the council and the mayor recognize the challenge for FY22 of the 1 mill rate in an election year on top of everything that's gone before, and the challenge of cutting a pretty lean budget. But that is their challenge, and if they can do it by Tuesday, that's wonderful. But I think that we've got to be flexible in terms of getting them to balance those things, and hopefully it will all come together. And I do see a commitment by the council to balance the budget in some way.
Thank you, Bob. And I know that we are very late in time, but we do have the council president on, and I would just I think it's to the benefit of the entire MARB to just hear a couple of remarks from you, Mr. President, with respect to the commitment of the council. Council President, are you still on the line? Okay, maybe not. All right. No, but I think your general remarks are spot on, Bob. Obviously, the time frame in which West Haven would be back to a point where they are on their own 2 feet, if you will, without state support, is also a time frame where the state itself will be experiencing some challenges. So we need to maintain the commitment to seeing that reduction in municipal restructuring funds, and the commitments on maintaining expenditures, driving down efficiencies, continuing to support that mill rate adjustment in order to achieve what is reflected in this plan. And we look forward to seeing the action that the council will take on this plan that should be indicative of their commitment. Certainly, we've done our due diligence in flagging the mill rate increase and the timing of that. And so they go into this eyes wide open, if you will. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Madam Secretary. My overall concern with the 5-year plan is what has been since it was originally implemented. You know, part of it is, and as Mr. White says about a mill rate increase in an election year, I certainly understand that the politics of it, but I mean, that's kind of been, and this isn't reflective on the current administration, this is reflective of 25, 30 years. That seems to have been the overall revenue versus expenditure projections has been a problem for, decades in the city, and the political will to make those adjustments. I'm glad that the council and the mayor's office seem to be more symbiotic than prior administrations. Glad to see that the council chair and the finance chair were in participation in discussion, which I know Chairman Quagliani has, certainly wanted to do for some time. So those are good evolutions. What concerns me is, unless I could very well have my the numbers wrong here, so feel free to correct me, was that the original plan for this year was a 39.26 mil increase. Then in the 5-year plan proposed in July 19, that went down to 38.69. Then in December of 19, it went down to 37.86, and now it's 37.48. And it's not as much as, a reduction or increase in a mill rate. It's that we approve these 5-year plans, and there's just such constant change to them. And as your co-chair pointed out, this budget right here, and of course with some other concerns, is like sits on a razor edge. I mean, there's I think two things that kind of raise my eyebrow is, seems like an over projection on revenue, but also, unless I heard it wrong, is basically the budget before us has, assuming that everything's good on the collection side, but the budget before us, without even taking that into account, it seems on the city side, has about $700,000 in expenditure for medical that's really not going to be realized because the rates came in lower. But meanwhile, we're still giving them $4 million of taxpayer money, and the 8-figure number that winds up as a fund balance at the end of this is all taxpayer money from the state of Connecticut. So what I anticipate and my concern is whatever, once that gets weaned off in a couple of years, we're still here, but our money isn't coming in anymore. And discussion yesterday about how they really wanted to lower the mill rate from what it currently sits at least, from the council side, which I can certainly understand that if I was a council person, is that, that fund balance, instead of maintaining or increasing, is going to start getting eaten into. There is a big drop in debt service because of the bonds. I think there's some capital expenditures that aren't being incurred. I heard things about police cars or whatever. And as been discussed many times, capital investment is what brings economic development. Parks, sidewalks, nice things, all that stuff. So I have an overall concern with a 5-year plan that constantly changes. And I would just say that whatever the 5-year plan is adopted by the board, and if it is adopted by us, my position would be is that it's not going to be something, I'm not going to look to then change it again and change it again and change it again. When I guess I don't see an investment of how the fund balance is going to grow without once our money stops getting infused into the city. So it's just an overall concern there, because getting things right, or hoping to get things right, well, we're dumping millions of dollars in, is one thing. The true test of how there's been changes and sustainability and things is going to be obviously when our money is no longer coming into the city. And I think those are going to be a lot of challenges with the overall, but that would be it. I would just hope that certainly the 5-year plan is reflective of the new cost of healthcare, or the overestimation that should be adjusted of the of healthcare increases. That's it.
Thank you, Pat. And Pat, I think you raised a lot of valid points. Obviously, we're trying to get West Haven to a place of financial sustainability as quickly as possible. Certainly, we've made some progress, and I would just point out that if we didn't have the reissuing of the financial statements from last year and the corrections on the payroll accrual, they would have been in a much better place with their fund balance. However, that was an unknown and something that we were not aware of. So I don't know if you participated in some of the meetings where that particular agenda item had been raised to the committee. So that is one of the contributing factors. But the bottom line is the city of West Haven has to maintain its commitment to restoring itself to fiscal health. And the original plan had more aggressive mill rate increases that at that time they seemed to be willing to execute and implement. And quite frankly, if they had stuck to that model, they would be off state subsidy. And they're obviously balancing that against, some of the challenges they're experiencing at the local level. But at the end of the day, what I have to make explicitly clear is, and this is to West Haven, is that the state's fiscal support is coming to an end. And we have to continue to work towards that, time period of fiscal 2023. And you want to use this time to get as strong as possible. And so while at times you might be pulled towards going slow and steady, But when you see that that is 2 years away, I encourage you to be as expeditious as possible, and that's why this board is here, is to ensure that that accountability is in place. You know, the time period in which you're still on state support is a time period where we're going to have a $2.4 billion deficit. So we hope that Muni aid remains flat, and we hope that the $2 million of MARB Muni can actually remain in this budget. But I would remind the committee that we have a lot of discretion. The municipal restructuring funds, those agreements are structured to be up to the amounts that are codified in these budgets. So to the extent that we don't continue to see progress, there's some flexibility in how those monies get actually distributed. With that, other discussion on the 5-year plan.
This is Mark Waxenberg. I share Pat and your concern about the 5-year plan. I think the problem that exists is one that we can't solve, meaning that we've looked for the systemic changes that are necessary within the city side of the budget. They're moving in tandem and in good faith as they at the beginning, and obviously changes are going to need to be made over the 5 years as certain things arise. I usually look for the future to see what the intended consequences may be, and those West Haven may right itself systemically and through the aid of the state hopefully have a general fund balance that it can use to use in its most prudent ways. And there's nothing we can do about it. If you look at the mill rate of West Haven as a city itself, it's not bad. I mean, structurally it has deficiencies and things of that nature that we're dealing with. If you combine the fire districts, which is another discussion that we've had and will continue to have, it's probably in the top 5 taxpayers of the state of Connecticut from a property tax perspective, as well as car tax at 45. The drag that those fire districts have politically on the passing of the city's budget and the operation of its city budget, I'm very concerned about it having a return of bad habits to rob from Peter to pay Paul. We can't control it. We can, but who wants to get, by claiming all the fire districts are tier 4, I don't see where they go. When you have fire districts that are calling for 7-8% increases, like the 1 mil over 12 is 8% increase, it's a drag, and that's the reality that exists in West Haven. But again, the political will that the city side needs to have to structurally right itself, I think is there. They've shown this willingness by the mayor and by the town leaders. I'm just fearful that the eating away of that will by things that are outside of their control may cause, and I'm hopeful that it won't, may cause a reverting back to bad habits. But that's to come, and I don't want to be a bringer of bad news for the future. I just have concerns, that's all.
Great. Any other discussion? Thank you, Mark. Okay, we're going to move along with an understanding that we will be awaiting action. Yes, ma'am.
Secretary, I just wanted to let you know, I contacted Chairman Quagliani to find out if he was still on the meeting. He was, but for whatever reason, he had some kind of technical difficulties that he was not able to speak. So he just wanted me to let you know that. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I appreciate that. All right, so our next steps will be to receive an update on council's actions. And thank you, Mayor, for giving us an update that has been submitted. And you're hoping they will take it up for this coming Tuesday's meeting. We will then, even if we need to schedule a special meeting of the subcommittee, we will then take our action in the subcommittee and then refer it to the full board for consideration. With that, if there's no other discussion on the 5-year plan, we're going to just do a 5-minute update on the monthly financial report for fiscal year 2020. And I'm going to ask you, Frank, to provide that very high level, please. Thank you.
Yes, very high level. You have the report in front of you. Tax collections are only very slightly behind where we were last year through March, 97.4 versus 97.5, which is good news. You'll notice that on the high-level summary P&L, I have reduced the revenue projection as well as captured some additional savings on the expenditure side. The surplus that I was expecting to be somewhere around $600,000, I've dropped that estimate to about $250,000. Continuing to watch that on a weekly basis as numbers come through. We are continuing to see a projected surplus on the sewer side of roughly $750,000, as well as a surplus of $300,000 in Allentown Fire. Again, everything being continually monitored to make sure that if we see anything, we can pull whatever triggers we have and mitigate as needed.
Great. And your overall projection for the year, excluding the MARB funds, where are you at?
Well, if I included the MARB funds in it, the $4 million, I would be at $250,000 surplus.
Very good, $250K. All right, and Frank, on your property tax collections, are you already seeing softness this year? Is that what you're telling me?
Through March, about 0.1% off from last year.
Okay.
Still, the overall dollar amount is still higher, but 97.35% versus 97.52.
Very good. So obviously, you're going to be continuing to monitor this, and if you're seeing softness in fiscal year 20, obviously your mitigation planning will start much sooner rather than later. Correct, Frank?
That is correct.
Okay, very good. Discussion on the monthly financial report, please.
Yeah, Madam Secretary, just for clarification, Frank, so what you're saying is through March, the collection rate has been in the lower 97s?
What I'm saying is through March, 97% of all expected revenue for taxation has been collected. That's
and
not
you're saying
and that's using that, so that's 97.4% of the budgeted 98% overall. So we are in line with prior years.
Okay, so last year, the current fiscal year we're in, the budgeted collection rate was 98, not 98.1, 98.2. It was 98.
98.4, correct. 98.4.
Okay, and we're at 97.5% of that collection.
That is correct. So we are in line with prior year.
Got it. Thank you.
And just to be clear, Frank, when I look at your revenue detail and you show the fiscal 19 year-to-date actual 97.5, are you saying that through March for fiscal year 2019 you were at 97.5? So you're perfectly online, is what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay. Good. That's positive. Other discussion? Okay, very good. Seeing nothing further on the financial report, we are concluding our West Haven agenda for today. So thank you to the West Haven team and to the mayor, to the council president, and all the council members that have joined today.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. So we're moving on to the city of Hartford, and just want to confirm that I know we have Yolita Lazowskis, budget director for the city of Hartford. Who else do we have in the call for City of Hartford? Mayor Bronin, are you with us? Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first item is and it's *6 to unmute, just to remind. Yes.
Good afternoon. This is
Luke Cronin. I didn't realize that *6 to unmute on here.
Okay, very good.
Good.
Okay. All right, so we'll start with our subcommittee update. There is a written update that was provided in the meeting materials. Julian, do you want to hit the high points, please?
The high points were essentially items that are going to be covered in the budget, or rather this agenda, the recommended FY21 budget and the subcommittee taking action on the budget assumptions. Also a review of the city's updated 5-year forecast and their revenue and expenditure initiatives that have been designed to close projected gaps in the budget. And then we had a brief update on the corrective action plan related to a couple of outstanding findings from the FY19 audit.
Okay, great. That shifts us right into the fiscal 2021 budget for review, discussion, and possible action. As Julian indicated, we did review the mayor's recommended budget at the April 28th meeting. Just a reminder, the MARB's role is to approve the budget assumptions on revenue. So we've spent a lot of time on mill rate, property tax collection, state aid. And we did vote to recommend approval by the full MARB based on the fiscal 21 budget assumptions. Julian, why don't you provide an overview of the 21 budget assumptions for the committee?
Yes. So the committee reviewed these and did vote favorably to recommend approval of these assumptions. The assumptions that are required for review include the mill rate, property tax revenues, and state revenue assumptions. The property taxes are based on the current mill rate of 74.29 mills. The mill rate and the property tax revenues were based on grand list growth of about 0.7%, which was, and a slight decline in the tax collection rate. And the tax collection rate is based on a 3-year average that is set out in the city's charter. And so that collection rate declined modestly from 96.05% to 95.96%. And the state aid was determined to be consistent with the state budget, which is essentially flat. The committee did do a review of the overall revenues and expenditures in the budget as well. Thank you.
Mayor Bronin, did you want to provide some comments pertaining to the fiscal 21 budget?
Sure. Thanks, Secretary McCaw, and good morning to everybody and all the members. At the highest, I'll give a very high-level overview, and then I'm happy to either myself or Yulita to answer any questions that you have in detail. At the highest level, the budget is 1% lower than last year. That represents about a $5.5 million reduction, both in revenues and in expenditures, since, of course, it's a zero-balance budget. As Julian just mentioned, our assumed tax collection rate is fixed by charter. However, we did reduce, in some cases significantly, the revenue that we anticipate from other sources in an attempt both to be accurate about those sources and also to prepare for the unknowns about revenue collection in general in the year ahead. So, for example, we in this budget dramatically reduce revenue from the parking authority. We eliminate revenue from the downtown north lots, the baseball stadium, and others. We reduce, in some cases, there are flat revenue lines that are basically flat from prior year, but they are reduced from our pre-pandemic expectations of fiscal year 21. And we also bumped up by $1 million our estimate of the tax appeals the impact of tax appeals that we might face. We believe that our estimate on tax appeals prior to adding that $1 million was already conservative based on outstanding appeals, but we wanted to add a little bit of extra caution. So overall, a 1% reduction in revenue from prior year and a 1% reduction in expenditures. The bulk of the reduction comes from two sources. One, a reduction in our capital improvement plan funding from general fund. As you
all recall, we are funding capital improvements on a pay-as-you-go basis or with operational dollars, not borrowing. And our capital improvement investment comes from a number of sources, from general fund, from grant reimbursements, and from new grants. And overall, we believe we're able to maintain a capital budget that is appropriate, though more modest and leaner than we would like. But we believe that there's no severe, let's say this. It is. We're not meaningfully exacerbating the deferred maintenance of critical infrastructure. We are still focusing on critical infrastructure, but we reduce our expenditures from general fund by about $4.5 million. We also have reduced, we've captured savings from our ongoing savings initiatives, for example, on the benefits and health side, as well as the retirement payout line, and we've also reduced some other non-operating expenditures as well in ways that we think are appropriate and consistent with past experience. So, as was discussed at length, there is obviously a great deal of uncertainty about the year ahead and what we will see in terms of revenue deterioration. We have tried to do a careful assessment of the properties that are at risk for us, and although we really don't know with certainty, we are comforted by the fact that a significant portion of our grand list is large commercial office buildings, and a significant portion of our grand list also pays through escrow and bank payments. There are also, of course, a number of residential buildings that are subsidized, low-income, affordable, which means that the rent payments continue through Section 8. So there is some protection on some of our properties that gives us, while not certainty, gives us some greater comfort. We continue to benefit from the labor contracts that were negotiated in the prior years. Those will start falling, coming up for renegotiation very soon, beginning with the fire union, which comes up at the end of this fiscal year on June 30th. The others are outside of FY21, so we continue to benefit from those, and as a result, the total payroll increases 1.3%, most of which reflects a shift from certain public safety functions from grant funded to general fund. We have some COPS grant positions that are moving from grant to general fund, and we have some safer grant fire positions that are coming from grant funding to general fund. But other than that, our position count is actually a little bit down, and our payroll is pretty flat. We fully fund the ADEC, and obviously fully fund our MBR. And I think that probably covers the highlights, but again, happy to go into detail on any part of what I discussed or anything I left out.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just with respect to the revenues as recommended for the purposes of the broader committee, I believe you indicated in subcommittee that the continuation of the $10 million corporate contribution that's within other financing sources, the corporate partners have given you a commitment that would move forward in fiscal 21, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then other note would just be that you've also appropriately adjusted your interest assumptions due to the current market conditions. So I see you've made an adjustment for a lower level of revenues in that particular category.
That's correct. We have reduced our interest and rental income line by $1.5 million to reflect the current interest rate environment.
Okay. And I just wanted to inquire about the interest and liens line item pertaining to the fiscal 20 budget does project that revenue line at $4.5 million, and then in 21, this is reduced down to $3.8 million. Is that all related to prior lien sales? Just wanted to understand why that line was going down.
I believe that is the continuing decline of the sale of subsequent liens. As you know, we have phased out our reliance on tax lien sales, and we have been utilizing tax deed sales as a tool to give us more control over the future of properties here. We obviously are not able to do that tax deed sale in this current environment. But Yolita, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, Mayor, you're absolutely correct.
Very good. And Leanne, I believe we had asked in subcommittee just to have a sense, and we asked this of West Haven, so I just want to be consistent. When we look back at the 08-09 timeframe, obviously this is a different experience we hope and anticipate. What did Hartford see in terms of impact or changes in tax collection rate during that particular downturn?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Leanne, do you know?
Good morning, it's Leanne. Sorry about that. I'm having difficulty getting unmuted for a moment. So when we looked back at the 2002, 2009 tax collection rate, it's important to note that the city was selling large amounts of liens back in that time frame. So the numbers are a tad bit off. I mean, we were talking probably $8 to $10 million in liens back then.
Okay.
So that had a material effect on the collection rate.
Got it. So you're not really able to, in a clean way, ascertain impact on tax collection rate excluding lien sales. I see.
Correct,
Okay.
because the parameters surrounding the sales back then were a lot different than the parameters surrounding the sales now.
Very good. And then I guess the question is for Yolita, and obviously Hartford over the past year or two has built a budget that has some conservatism in there, and that's helpful obviously because of the PAYGO CapEx, and it certainly helped to build some fund balance. Do you think that besides fund balance that there's still some potential lapse or favorability that is baked in that could help to offset any surprises on tax collection rate? Just curious your thoughts.
So it is possible that there is some, the biggest unknown, but the biggest potential area for favorability, I believe, is healthcare. We have seen significant favorability this year, but we also know that could largely be, and certainly a big part of it is because of the shutdown over the past couple of months. And we don't know whether, but let me say, even prior to the shutdown, we were trending below budget. What we don't know is whether the year ahead will reflect the pre-pandemic trend or whether we will see a spike in costs as people catch up with procedures. So that's one possibility. There are, I think overall it's a pretty, there's not a ton of padding, but I will say we do anticipate some greater potential favorability in this current fiscal year, a big piece of that from healthcare. And if that is the case, what we have tentatively talked about beyond our existing priorities of funding capital reserve and building up fund balance would be to create an assigned fund balance that's intended as a COVID contingency.
Very good. And Mayor, just a quick question on the health line that's projected at 35.2 in fiscal 20 and budgeted at 34.6 for the purposes of the subcommittee. For the full committee, I think in subcommittee, Yolita, you might have indicated that the projection for fiscal 20 has not yet reflected your current trend. Otherwise, it looks a little odd. But is that correct, Yolita? The 35.2 will likely be lower in fiscal 20?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct. As of P9, we're projecting 33.2, but as we pull the P10 numbers, we believe that's going to be more favorability projected in reflected in the next report. So
Very
we
good.
definitely feel comfortable with the projection on the health for $34 million.
Great. Other discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Mark Waxenberg. I have a series of questions, but if it's okay with you, in the spirit of timeliness, I will forward them to Julian so that he can forward them to the mayor and/or finance people for a response, either at our next subcommittee, probably at our next subcommittee meeting, if that's okay with you.
Mark, I would be inclined for you to ask those questions today, given that it is the end of May and we have 1 month. If this is a budget that the board is comfortable with, I'd like to move it forward for action.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with the budget itself as much as in the subcommittee, for example, the vacancies versus positions filled, have a breakdown by department on that for us to review.
Sure.
Great Path, I've looked at it, and that's a later item on the agenda. We have no role in that, but I'm just curious, and I have some questions about that contract. None of the questions I have are preventing me from voting in favor of the budget as much as clarifying issues in my mind that I couldn't satisfy by reviewing the budget. Most notably the breakdown by department of positions versus vacancies. In other words, my assumption is the budget is built on positions, including vacancies. 6 positions, but 2 may be vacant. So the question is, so the question I have is, by department, you're budgeting at 100 positions, how many are vacant? You know, during a period of time, will they lapse? Will they not lapse? All of those. But that's it. More substantively, though, for, again, a subcommittee discussion, Mr. Mayor, in reviewing we talked about this at the subcommittee, and I don't, again, want to spend a lot of time on this other than there was a discussion about revenue enhancements, and I've communicated this to Julian and the chair. Can you supply to at least the subcommittee, if you were to assume pilot funding for all of the quasi-public properties in Hartford's boundaries and its municipal nonprofits, i.e. the MDC, if you were to assume that there would be pilot funding, present pilot funding I think is 45%, what would that mean in additional revenue to the city? If such, of course, you would get money, the state would have to pay it, but can there be a computation shared with the subcommittee as to what that means?
We can do our best to put that together, Mark. I mean, off the top of my head, the MDC alone has billions of dollars worth of property in the city, and so at roughly 45% of our mill rate for the MDC alone, you're talking about $25 million.
Okay, well, just putting those figures together, I know MDC was incorporated back in the 20s, but if that could be put together, it's something for us to examine. I appreciate it, if that's okay with the chair.
Absolutely. You are making my other job harder, but certainly. Thank you very much, Mark. Any other comments, questions, and discussion for Hartford's 21 budget? Okay, with that, well, let me just conclude by saying that while our discussion was shorter with Hartford, our review is as rigorous. And from the perspective of the revenue assumptions, which is our role under the statute, and the broader budget for approval based on our role under contract assistance, the revenue assumptions are sound. Obviously, there is that uncertainty with respect to the current economic climate. And Mayor, I appreciate your comments to take some favorability this year and to basically create a restricted or designated fund balance. I think that is a smart approach, as well as some of the additional favorability that's baked into the fiscal 2021 budget, albeit limited. And you've made a number of adjustments in your revenue assumptions. I think they're responsible and appropriate and reflective of what you anticipate to occur. On the expense side, we did spend a lot of time evaluating the assumptions there as well. Your full-time numbers, your payroll numbers look sound, your benefit numbers are in alignment with prior year trends. And I have to commend the city. I remember we were all worried about how we would operate under a pay-go CapEx program. But for the time being, it's been working, and I see the adjustments you've made to bring that in alignment to with what you can actually afford. So I don't have any concerns about the budget that is before us today. And with that, if there are no other comments, discussions, or requests for edits, then I'd like to entertain a motion for the approval of the fiscal 2021 budget, contingent upon the approval of the 5-year plan by the City Council. For consistency with West Haven, we want to ensure that our expectations are the same for all MARB municipalities. So with that, unless there's other discussion or questions, then the motion is to approve fiscal 2021 as recommended by the mayor, contingent upon the approval of the 5-year plan by the City Council. Obviously, that 5-year plan will receive approval through the subcommittee and through the full MARB as well.
This is Mark. I make the motion to approve.
Bob White, second.
Very good. Is there any discussion?
This is Bob White. Just to highlight what Mark has said, there was some conversation within the subcommittee that I think should be ongoing regarding the long-term plan that, as carefully crafted as this budget is, I think at least some of us are coming to the conclusion that there are structural issues in regard to certainly Hartford, in that with a number of people of high need in a small geographic area without an adequate tax base is the problem that good management, even as good as we see here, is going to have extreme difficulty dealing with, and that we've encouraged the mayor to think outside the box, as I'm sure he and his team have been, about things that we can do other than the state, stroking a check. So I just want to mark that in terms of future discussions.
So noted. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none. Julian, if you can call the roll.
Yes. Mr. Egan. I'll move on to the next person, and we'll come back to Mr. Egan if he might have had trouble unmuting. Mr. Biller?
Yes, approve.
Ms. Shaw? Mr. Waxenberg?
Yes.
Mr. Felsigno?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Tom Hamilton sent me a message that he had to leave the meeting. Secretary McCaw?
Yes.
I'll try again for Mr. Egan? And Ms. Shaw?
Julian, do we have sufficient votes for that motion to be approved?
It's 5 votes, yes.
Okay, very good. Then the motion passes, and we'll have to reflect the others as having abstained. Great. Moving on to the monthly financial report for March 2020. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lazowska so she can give us a brief run-through of the projections for the current fiscal year.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I was having a technical difficulty. Good afternoon. So through fiscal year 2020 P9 March, revenues are tracking favorable by 2.6 million comparing to the last year, cumulative through March, primarily in general property tax revenue. General property tax revenue collections are tracking favorable by 1.3 million comparing to the last year. However, due to COVID-19 public health crisis, the projections for this revenue category has been adjusted to reflect an additional shortfall of 2.5 million. Due to this public health crisis, additional shortfall has been recorded in the following revenue categories. License and permits, 520,000, primarily in building and mechanical license fee collections. Revenue from money and property, 381,000 due to unfavorable and inconsistent market interest rates, and other revenue categories of 100,000. Total of 3.5 million projected revenue shortfall has been recorded in March financial report. In March, expenditure projections are lower and favorable by 5.65 million. The main drivers are payroll, benefits, utilities, which are offset by non-personal category. Favorability in payroll of 1.57 million attributed to savings in vacancies and attrition in full-time and lower overtime expenses in police department, DPW, offset by higher projected expenditures in fire department. Benefits are favorable by 4 million in health claims, cash out, insurance claims, social security and unemployment expenses. Utilities are favorable by 165,000 due to lower expenditures in pipe, heat, and AC due to moderate winter, offset by increase in gasoline and diesel fees, and non-personal is unfavorable by 143,000 due to unbudgeted contractual services and less reimbursements on relocation expenses. An additional need of technology to support staff to work remotely. Unfavorable variance of 3.5 million in revenues, offset by favorability of 5.65 million in expenditures. 2.4 million is recorded in pay-as-you-go line item to support CAP needs. In summary, fiscal year 2020 projected revenue shortfall is 6.9 million and projected expenditure windfall is 9.5 million. The projected net surplus of the fiscal year 2020 as of March 31st is 2.6 million. That's complete my report.
Thank you, Lita. Just a couple of questions. In the area of part-time payroll, are there any comments as to what's driving up the projection there?
The part-time payroll is due to families and family department part-time support. So that's primarily because of the expense that occurred beginning of this fiscal year.
Very good. And I can see that in the most current projection, you have adjusted your health estimate and reduced it down to the 33.1 million. I was curious on the insurance line item. We had actual cost of 4.8 million in fiscal 19, and you're projecting 4.3 million. Is that just current trend on claims?
That is correct.
Okay. And then with respect to the fringe reimbursements, at 5.3 in credits last year to the 4.1 million, is that just reflective of individuals coming off of COPS grants and having been picked up in the general fund for fiscal 20?
That is correct, yes, and safer grant as well.
Very good. Other questions, discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on. So projecting a $2.7 million shortfall. And can you just remind me on the closing fund balance for Hartford for June 30th, 2019?
June 30th, 19?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It was projected 4.8 million. The FY 2019, yes, the surplus was 4.8.
That was the increase in fund balance, but the total fund balance was closer to 9, correct?
That is correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Very good. Next up for Hartford is the review and discussion of the updated 5-year plan for fiscal years 2021 through 2025. The city has updated its 5-year plan. It was presented to the subcommittee at our April 28th meeting. There was feedback that was provided to the city, but before we do so, I'm just going to ask Julian if you want to give some of the highlights, and then Mayor can have a couple minutes for comments, and then we can talk about the feedback that we provided to the city.
Yes, and very quickly, Christine Shaw had gotten disconnected from the meeting. She's back in now, I believe, and if it's okay, she'd like to get her vote on the budget assumptions for the record in.
Yes, please do.
Yes, thank you, Madam Secretary. I just before you called the vote, I was disconnected. So if the minutes could reflect that, I actually would approve or vote to approve the 2021 budget.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you.
Very good.
Great.
Thank you. So as the Secretary mentioned, the subcommittee did review the 5-year forecast from the city at the last subcommittee meeting. The forecast essentially showed a continuation of most of the assumptions from its previous forecasts. The most significant adjustment has been to grand list growth, which is not materialized at the same rate as originally projected. So we see for FY21 reflecting the 0.7% growth, and the subsequent year 2 similar growth, and then FY23, which is a reval year, 3.5% growth. And this compares to fairly consistent 1.5% growth per year in the previous versions of the plan. The plan continues to use flat mill rates of 74.29 for real estate and personal property and 45 for motor vehicles. Some of the revenue categories are adjusted for a temporary reduction due to the economic downturn in year 1, but then returning to more historic levels. The state aid is consistent with prior plans in projecting flat levels of aid throughout the plan. The salary assumptions use a 1.6% growth rate for each year. Health insurance uses a 7% escalation rate. The pension projections are based on projected ADEC requirements, and education is level funded throughout the plan. We know that the capital plan is based on a pay-as-you-go basis and is going to be limited by whatever the circumstances are and whatever potential projected surpluses are from time to time. And we know that debt service is limited to just a few specific issuances for revenue bonds and any debt that was not included in the contract for assistance. So the most significant adjustment being the grand list growth, and its impact flows through in two primary ways. One is limiting the city's ability to take on additional pay-as-you-go capital, but it has also increased the projected gap between revenues and expenditures throughout the 5-year plan, and increased the importance for the revenue and expenditure initiatives that are designed to mitigate that gap. So that concludes my brief overview of the updated 5-year forecast.
Thank you, Julian. A couple of other notations. We did have discussion pertaining to the assumptions on the payroll or personal services increase, given that a number of the contracts will be up for renegotiation, and it's quite possible that that average rate of growth in payroll might not be able to be sustained, given the aggressive contracts that the city just achieved. Also within healthcare, it's important to note the city also includes a 7% medical inflation, also 2% claims margin. So there's some cushion built in there, and obviously performance and trend will ultimately dictate what those outcomes are. And then we obviously will have to continue to monitor the pension long-term rate of return of 7.25%. Hopefully the market downturn will be short-lived, but certainly the extent to which we do not achieve the investment rate of return in future years, we will see a hit to the ADEC. That will be smoothed out, but certainly require an increase in budgeted levels. At the end of the day, the 5-year plan that's before us, as was approved in original concept, we knew that the fiscal 2023 impact of the grand list was a significant milestone for the city, and we'll have to continue to monitor the extent to which the 3.5% can be achieved. The plan, however, that is before us is not balanced, and so we had robust conversation, and the mayor was going to give consideration to thinking of some contingency measures to bring this 5-year plan into balance. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mayor, to give any remarks or share thoughts with the committee on measures that you might be considering to help achieve balance. Obviously, we talked about the board not being able to take action on the plan that's not in balance, and that you would and the team would go back and take a look further. So I'll turn it over to you, Mayor.
Thanks, Madam Secretary. So let me just say, we have, as we've always had, a concern about the fragility of the long-term plan, and obviously one of the key assumptions has always been grand list growth, including in the reval year. The outcome of that reval year, as well as even the timing of that reval year, is somewhat more in doubt today than before. It's entirely possible that we may, like many municipalities, seek to delay a reval given the extraordinary circumstances that we're living through right now. So we have significant concerns about the long-term sustainability. That said, we take very seriously the need to balance our budgets over the long term. But I think, as I said in subcommittee, I think it is important to say just directly and honestly, I do not believe that there is a way to balance the budget absent new revenue in a way that does not rely on significant cuts to personnel or service. And needless to say, if necessary, those cuts will be made, but I don't believe that they can be made lightly. I think we made some pretty deep cuts to service and personnel in the last few years, and we should be very, very cautious before cutting deeper into personnel and service because we are running at a fairly lean service delivery level as it is. But aside from employee compensation, employee headcount, and service delivery, I do not believe that there is an honest proposal to put this budget in balance in those out years, absent new revenue. And so what we would propose is what we discussed both in committee and subcommittee in the past, which is a return to the discussion about the structural challenges and the need for additional revenue diversification and the possibility of finding other revenue sources, whether that's a portion of sales and hospitality tax or whether it is an expansion of the what qualifies under the pilot formula. So we would be eager to put those ideas forward and eager to discuss those further. And we would be happy to put together some scenarios that would estimate the level of service cuts necessary to achieve balance. But I want to be, to be direct that I do not believe the efficiency initiatives that we are currently pursuing are adequate or will be adequate to close the projected gaps if we do not have revenue growth.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to open it up for further discussion and just remind everyone to place your phones on mute if you're not speaking. Discussion?
Madam Secretary, can I add one more thing?
Of course.
It's just to put these gaps in context. I think you made an important point, which I had raised at the subcommittee as well, which is the fact that this over the last 4 years, our employees have all had 0 wage increases, and they also made significant concessions on health care and pension contributions, healthcare plan design and healthcare premium share, as well as, in some cases, pension benefits and pension contributions. So it's highly unlikely that we will see the same level of savings from labor negotiations in the years ahead. But that said, if you look at the size of the gap that we have projected here, not counting those potential labor cost increases, the roughly $4.5 million gap could be closed by a reduction in the capital expenditure line. And after FY22, our plan does restore that general fund contribution to capital to the $10.4 million that we had in the prior years. So it reverses the cut that we imposed this year as part of budget mitigation. I just want to put that, make sure everyone understands that piece.
Yes, that's fair. And I concur. I mean, a $4.8 million gap on the size of Hartford's budget could be certainly achieved. I don't see the opportunity for, major slashing of positions and things of that nature, but there probably are some areas where we budget for expectations that don't actually come through. And the capital, if you had to, could be trimmed back, albeit it is a very modest capital budget, and there are other non-quantitative costs that come along with that. But I don't see the $4.8 million as consistent with your remarks, Mayor, as not being able to be achieved if the worst case scenario were to occur. I think the bigger question, and I know you can put forth an updated document that shows how you would close it. I agree with you that the real exposure is if the 3.5% grand list does not materialize. That's where I think we have challenges that will be much more difficult to mitigate.
We share that concern. It's worth noting that one of our largest so far we have seen that in the Hartford region, residential property values have thus far seemed to have remained pretty stable. And the other thing is that we have our current economic development efforts, I believe, will be proceeding uninterrupted. For example, the major developments around the downtown north, park in Maine, the Parkville market just opened, which is the first step toward a much more ambitious redevelopment in Parkville. So I do believe we will be able to keep up that momentum. And the other interesting thing is that we've continued to see some new commercial leases, including some leases that are quite large, signed in the last few weeks, even during this pandemic. So in terms of the stability of our commercial market and residential market, thus far, we have not seen major disruption, but of course we don't know the duration or the depth of the recession ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Other discussion, comments, questions on the 5-year plan? All right, hopefully you're not losing steam on us here. But anyhow, in terms of next steps, Mayor, we'll have you put together the soft plan and how to close the gap that's here for the 5-year plan, and then we will vet that through the subcommittee and bring, we will likely make a favorable recommendation once that is done to have you present that to your council, and then the MARB would be able to then take action on it, similar to West Haven. And if the committee doesn't have any other questions on the 5-year plan, then we will move along to the non-labor contracts to obtain approval so the city can move forward. And hearing none, we will do that. So non-labor contracts, we have the Aetna parking agreement. And so I'll turn it over to you, Mayor, or to Yolita, from whoever is representing those items, to provide an overview to the board.
Madam Chair, this is Clarence Beck from the Board of Education. This is one of our contracts.
Very good, sir. You have the.
So basically, we have a need for parking at Hartford Public High School. As you see in the overview, with the construction going on at Interstate 84, we had to lease some space from Aetna to handle the parking. This is just the continuation of that lease. It's an ongoing lease as construction continues on Interstate 84.
Very good. Any discussion on the Aetna parking agreement? Okay, Clarence, MCC Great Path Academy.
As the board may know, we have a magnet school that we operate out at Manchester Community College called Great Path Academy. We have a contract with MCC through the state Board of Education. So this is the contract. It's basically, terms are remain the same. This is just a renewal of the existing contract.
Discussion and comment, and are we renewing it at a flat amount, sir?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Very good. Any discussion or comments on the MCC Great Path Academy?
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is Mark. Again, my understanding is it's $2.9 million at a maximum. I was involved back in 2002 when this was discussed in Manchester, and it's since morphed into a magnet. But the questions I have regarding various things, because this is for information purposes anyway, I will forward through you to the Board of Ed for the next subcommittee if that's appropriate.
Happy to do so, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further comments or discussion on these two contractual items, we've concluded all of our agenda items for Hartford. Thank you, Mayor, Yolita, Leanne, and Clarence, and the team. We'll talk with you very soon, I suspect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great job. All right, so we're moving on to the town of Sprague. Thank you for your patience. And we will start with a subcommittee update. Julian, over to you.
Thank you. Yes. So the Sprague subcommittee has not met since the last meeting of the MARB. We have had ongoing conversations with the first selectman regarding the budget process, and I provided in the meeting materials a roughed out schedule for moving the budget along and the budget approval process. And this is still obviously subject to change. The town had been pinning its hopes on some ability to move forward with a referendum at some point in the process. It's obviously not going to be feasible at this point. So the timeline that we roughed out would allow for the subcommittee to review and refer to the full MARB under the sort of the following timeline, which is there is a Sprague Board of Finance meeting tonight. There's a possibility, but not certain yet, that they're going to be ready to release a proposed FY21 budget. If they do, we would be looking for a subcommittee meeting hopefully sometime next week, and the Board of Finance to follow that subcommittee review, which would occur simultaneously with a public comment period, for the Board of Finance to come back and approve a budget sometime around June 10th, and hopefully have possible MARB approval at its June 11th meeting. Again, that's one plausible timeline. It remains to be seen if the Board of Finance is ready to release a proposal this evening.
Thank you for the update. Any questions for Julian on the subcommittee update? It looks like we are in a holding pattern until we actually have a budget that will be released. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the monthly financial report for March 2020. And we have representatives from the town that will provide an overview of their financial report.
Yes, this is Cheryl Blanchard. We are moving along. The revenues at the end of March, we collected 87%. Property taxes are at 99% of the 97% budgeted. Pretty much everything is still close to what we were year over year. We haven't received all of the state financing, the town aid road money. Well, we did receive the town aid road money, but we didn't receive the municipal revenue sharing money yet. Our highway expenditures are lower due to the mild winter, and we expect that our waste management expenses will increase in this last quarter because of the increase of bulky waste due to COVID-19. To limit contact, we have not been collecting money for the bulky waste, so it's been kind of everybody is cleaning out everything. But all in all, we're moving along. We've gotten a lot more caught up on the Board of Ed bills, and so we anticipate things are going to look good there.
Thank you. Cheryl, I will look into the municipal revenue sharing funds. They come out of OPM, so I'm surprised that you haven't received them, and I will follow up, have the team follow up with you.
That was the last time I had looked, Kim, so I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. All right. So overall, your overall projection for the year then is what exactly? Are you projecting to close right on budget? Any small surplus? And that assumes inclusion of the state's municipal restructuring funds. Can you just clarify for me, please?
This includes the funds we've already received.
Yep.
And if we are anticipating that we may close with a very, very small surplus, but that's, it's definitely a moving target.
Very good. Okay, questions, comments, discussion on the fiscal 20 financial report for Sprague?
This Mark again. When I looked at that, did it show that the Board of Ed looks like they're going to be having over $200,000 surplus? Is that accurate? I gave a quick glance. Is that fairly accurate that they'll be turning back to the town over $200,000? Is that fair?
That is the amount that they are projecting as a surplus. They will not be turning all of that back. They spoke with the Board of Finance, and they are, in lieu of putting items into the capital projects for next year, they have a sidewalk that needs to be replaced, a lawnmower. They're going to pay for those items out of this year's budget.
Okay.
So that we don't have to put them into capital projects.
Okay, thank you.
This is Bill Hall, the superintendent. We expect to give back, depending on our negotiations with our transportation company, we expect to give back around $75,000 back to the town. It could go north of that depending on the negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Cash position is strong for the city?
The cash position, not really strong, no.
Well, do you feel like you're able to meet your minimum liquidity levels? What is
Yes.
your perspective on the cash position?
At this point, we're meeting everything, meeting our minimums, and we've had a cash flow issue, and it's not gone away. So we just monitor it regularly.
Okay. I'd like to ask for a cash report, and you might have already provided it through Ms. Kennison, but that the MARB have an opportunity to understand the cash position and any constraints you're facing. And
I can comment on that.
Okay, go right ahead, Kim.
From the cash projection, we can see that they're tipping low in the month of June. Excuse me. And that could then be a little bit of concern. I think that the feedback that we received, what they would have to do would be hold off on payables for that month and wait pending the July tax collections. And so then they would have sufficient funding when we're looking out into July and August. So there is a low point in June.
Okay. So if the state were to make available resources through the municipal liquidity facility, which is a way the Fed's provided to strengthen short-term cash position, it sounds like that's something that Sprague could benefit from.
Mm-hmm. It certainly does.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on Sprague's financial position? I mean, it sounds like at the end of the day, until you really bolster your fund balance, you'll continue to have periods where the cash position is very thin.
That's correct, because we have nowhere to take it from. It's just what's coming in the door. So.
Got it. Okay.
In addition to this, Melissa, just so Secretary, as you just want to bring to your attention, is the capital side of life. As they continue to have to fund any kind of capital side of life, it draws upon the cash.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. Other discussion on Sprague? Okay. Seeing none, the last item, thank you all for your patience and flexibility in going over. We will likely make our meetings 3 hours so we can get through the agenda a little bit better since there's a lot here, but important work. I just want to turn it over to Kimberly Kennison to give an update on the release of the tiers report that's required by statute. Over to you, Kim.
Sorry about that. I had just put myself on mute. Can you hear me?
So you have the floor.
Okay. The tiers report is included in your packet, and what I wanted, this is the second time that this report has actually been issued since the tiers had come into play. I wanted to give a quick update, which would let you know that Julian, Bill, and I actually presented to the Connecticut CPA conference and on monitoring oversight of municipalities and fiscal health. And we shared a walkthrough of the structure from legislature to the MFAC, to the tiers, to the MARB, and also provided a bit of a snapshot that's what's to come as we begin to automate our infrastructure and our financials. So that is in the process. When looking at these tiers, this particular report is based on your 2018 audited information. One of the changes that we made this year was any of the new municipalities that would have been put into the tier structure as eligibility, not designated. We did have individual meetings with them to bring it to their attention, and we had some outcomes that came from that, actually positive outcomes, to let us know that we know we still have work to do through legislature to make some changes to some of the data sets criteria that is listed on page 3 that talks to you about the criteria, and it's very extensive ratings that come through in order to become a tier. So in tier 1, there are 3 sets. In tier 2, there are 5 sets of criteria. Tier 3, there are 2 sets, but it has an A and a B. And they're measured on credit rating, fund balance, state aid, equalized mill rate. And within each one of these data sets, any one set of the criteria will allow somebody to fall into the tiered structure. We currently have four towns that are falling within tier 3. We have in tier 2. We have 5 towns that fall into tier 2, and we have 1 town that falls into tier 1. And we have the 3 towns that are already designated under the MARB. And if you look at the detail, it is it's actually in alphabetical order by town. And the right-hand column all the way over that talks about the tier status, ND means non-designated, and NE would equal non-eligible. An E would equal eligible, and then we would say the tier number. So I think it's pretty as simplistic as possible for such a complex set of criteria and ratings that come about. We included this time a narrative so that folks can understand a little bit more about the MARB and the MFAC, because there has been some confusion around that, where we have people calling saying, oh, we want to belong. And I'm like, I don't think you've listened to the MARB tapes to understand if you really want to belong. I think they think that it is just somebody writing a check to them. Anyway, we're pleased to have this out, and at this very moment, we are collecting data for our 2019 as the towns have continued to put forth all of their annual fiscal audited statements as of fiscal June 30th, 2019. Any questions? Oh, I did have one other thing I wanted to comment on. There are 2 towns that any town that fell into the tiers, we gave them an opportunity to look at their data if it came forward in 2019. And we built in a footnote for actually 2 towns. And that is because when their data came through from a current perspective of 2019, one would have fallen off, and that'd be town of New London, and the other town, New Haven, their tier actually would have changed. So that footnote is located on page 7.
Thank you very much, Kim. Any questions for Kim on the tier report? I have to say that in the spirit of transparency, I think that this particular report is useful in shining a light on municipalities that are tinkering on the verge of needing to make corrective actions very quickly, or could find themselves in MFAC or MARB status, some of which already are in MARB status. And, given the role of OPM in municipal fiscal operations, best practices, et cetera, I do think it's important that we adhere to the requirement to provide this report and continue to just impress upon lawmakers and decision makers, the strength. There are areas where there's lack of strength in our city, because obviously strong cities is strong Connecticut. So I will say that we have received some unfavorable commentary from some municipalities that did not want to see themselves in this report. And I would say that is indicative that the tool is therefore effective, because if you don't want to see your municipality in this report, then we should be taking measures to bring the municipalities back to a place of strength. So I just want to thank the team for putting it together. I know it's a considerable amount of work, but it does continue to move towards a broader accountability across the state. Thoughts or comments? Okay. I believe hearing none, unless there are technical difficulties, I think we're ready to adjourn. I just want to conclude with some final comments. Again, I know that the work here is tedious, but as I reflect on the 3 municipalities that are under oversight by the MARB, when I think about West Haven, a lot of our efforts we've made considerable progress, but we continue to push for them to embrace sustainability and to do so expeditiously, and maintaining the fiscal balance in the out years when they are not under oversight. We should continue to focus on making sure that infrastructure is sound, corrective actions under audits, the policies and procedures, et cetera, so that the work that we're jointly doing, hopefully can be maintained. When I think about Hartford, their outlook for growth and the grand list assumptions is an area that obviously we continue to have some concerns about. And the lack of revenue growth is problematic. We can't forget that 50% comes from the state, and so that the state has some ownership, if you will, towards flat muni aid in an environment where municipal costs continue to grow. So that's something we'll continue to have those conversations at a higher level. And then lastly, as we think about Sprague, we've remedied structural challenges, but in order to get them to a place of health, they need to have stronger reserves, or it could take a very small event and it could tip them back into, a problem. So as I see it, those are the challenges that we have before us, and I thank you all for your partnership in this ongoing work. And if there are no, yes, ma'am.
One last comment, because I would be remiss in not making this comment. I have to echo my team of Bill Plummer and the Municipal Fiscal Services area, as well as Julian, who are the heavy lifters who help pull all of this data together throughout the entire year.
I agree wholeheartedly. Many thanks to Julian and to Bill for their Herculean efforts, and at times are extensions of some of the municipalities, so thank you both. Any other discussion from MARB members before we move to adjourn? Madam Co-Chair, any comments?
None. Thank you for bringing us to the end of a very productive meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, if there's anyone who wants to move a motion to adjourn.
David Biller, so moved.
Thank you, David.
No problem.
Second.
Steve Belsig, no second.
Very good. All right, we are adjourned. No vote required. And David, you seem like you were quite anxious to do so, as we all are.
I just wanted to participate. That's all.
There you go, David. All right, everyone. Thank you.
The mute button.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's another part of the productivity. Thank you all. Have a great day, and till next time, take care.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye. Bye-bye.